ask yourself, what did I learn? What did I benefit? What was the use of my being here, right? And I remember calling him up once and asking him what to do about these social functions that I have absolutely no, or professional functions that I have absolutely no interest in. And now as a priest, there are also times where I have to go and I have to be present at something. I'm on various committees with the Canadian Council of Churches and all this stuff. And like I love the people, but the subject matter is not something that I'm very passionate about. And, I'm kind of representing the Coptic Church, and it's kind of, I'm doing what I should do, right? Well, you know what? He told me something. He told me, remember what I told you about trying to learn something from everybody that you meet? Do that. You're not going to be in this council meeting again this spring, or this fall, or this whatever, right? It's just this once. What do you want to make out of this? He used to coach me for my interviews, and he would tell me, when people ask you a question in an interview, you need to give an answer that's going to make them ask the next question that they ask is the question you want to answer. You walk into an interview and they're driving. Within the first third of the interview, he used to tell me, you've got to start driving the interview. That doesn't mean be annoying and pushy. That means give answers that have a cliffhanger, so they want to ask you about that. And they forget about their notes and they start asking about the stuff you want to talk about. Take control of the situation. Not to be manipulative, but to make the most of it. And in our context here, for God's glory. Mary was sharing this with me in this news. This woman in Nova Scotia with breast cancer and is terminal. And she has actually chosen physician-assisted dying or death, end of life. And part of the laws about that, it's very complicated stuff. Part of the laws of that is that you have to be fully compos mentis, you have to be fully alert and aware when your life ends, when you make the decision that this is the time. So you can't wait, you can't say, I want to wait until this certain time. I'm not an expert, but from this article and following this a little bit, not that I'm into physician-assisted dying or anything like that, and that's a whole other topic for another day, but the point is this lady has a couple of weeks left to live, and she decides, I'm going to spend them trying to change the law, because the law is not in favor of the people who need this. The law is protecting them, defending them from other things, and we could discuss it some other time. But it's not, she's got a couple of weeks left to live, and she could be bemoaning her condition. She could be, surrendering to her death and just laying in bed doing nothing. But she's not. She can't get out of bed, but she's lobbying and she's fighting for what she thinks is right. She's making every last minute count. What about you? What about me? How many days go by and I think to myself, what did I do today? And I can't answer the question. And the reality is that there's this illusion that we have that we're going to live forever. And at the same time, we live in a constant fear of death. It's a very strange paradox that we're in. Why do I say that we think we're going to live forever? Because we behave that way. I behave like there's always a tomorrow. I behave like I can procrastinate the important things in my life. I don't have to call my mom and my dad now. My mom and dad are fine. They're in relatively good health. They take care of themselves. How often do I call them? How important are they to me? Am I making the most of every moment? Or am I assuming that there will always be a tomorrow? The signature line of my spiritual father when he sends me an email is a quote from St. Augustine. He says, God has promised you today for your repentance. He has not promised you tomorrow for your procrastination. In Job 14 it says, the days of man are numbered. I'm not gonna live forever. I've got news for you. It's really big news. I'm gonna die. And so are you. Not to be morbid, not to be but it's our reality. So in this limited period of time, what am I going to do? And the moment that I have guaranteed is now. And that's the moment I need to take hold of and do what I think is the most meaningful with. There's a beautiful story about this in the Old Testament. The city of God was under siege. and there's famine, and a massive, massive army surrounding the city, and they locked the gates. And there were these 4 lepers, and they were sitting outside the gates. And look at the situation of these 4 men, right? It was not the situation of opportunity. So, number 1, they're lepers. They have a disease which is eating them alive, literally. Number 2, because of that, no one wants to be anywhere near them, and they're outcasts. Number 3, they're at war. Anytime you're at war, you're in trouble. Number 4, they're on the losing team at war. Number 5, there's famine. I mean, these guys are screwed. Like, they don't have a hope in anything, right? And they're sitting outside the gates, and they're talking amongst themselves. And they say, why do we sit here until we die? Why do we sit here until we die? And then they come up with this idea, and they say, what if let's go to the enemy, maybe they have food and they'll feed us. We can't go in the city, they threw us out of the city. So the only other place to go is the enemy. If they kill us, we die. Queen Esther goes to see the king unlawfully, which should be punished by death, to beg of him the life of her nation. And when her attendants tell her, what are you doing? You can't do that. She says, I go, and if I perish, I perish. My favorite lines in Scripture. They say, why do we sit here until we die? Maybe the enemy will feed us. Maybe they'll kill us. It'll be better than sitting here and waiting to die. Why do I sit here until I die? Those of you who know me well, and those of you who don't, you'll know now, I'm kind of moody. Kind of a lot, right? Like, you know the moody teenager phase? I kind of grew out of it, but kind of not really, right? My poor wife, right? There are days that I wake up in the morning and I have to coach myself. November 11th, 2018 is never going to happen again, John. Pull up your bootstraps. You know you don't feel like it. You know you're upset and grumpy for no good reason. Just do it. Why do you sit here until you die? Why not do something which leads to life? And we'll share the end of their story as we go. It's another beautiful story in the Old Testament where the men of King David were at war. And King David had like a little clan amongst his army called the Mighty Men. One of those mighty men was Shammah. So the general of the army decided that the war was too fierce and that they should retreat. Shammah said, no way. And he stood his ground, planted his feet, right? And he fought. And he fought until God gave him an enormous victory. Yes, he overcame the remainder of an army alone. And he said, if I die, I die. We live not too far from the Humber River, and every now and again we'll go on a walk there. I think it's a couple of times a year. The fish swim to go lay their eggs or something. I'm not a zoologist. I don't really know exactly how it works, but the fish swim upstream. And it's magnificent because there's this place where it changes level, and you see the fish jumping out of the river, and they're jumping and they're swimming, right? It's just magnificent to see these fish, large fish, able to swim against the current up and throw themselves over this like little dam to get to the other side. The other day, Mary and I and the girls were there, and we were going for a walk, and it stank of like dead fish, you know? So Mary asked me, what's that smell? I said, oh, it must be a dead fish. There must have been a fish that wasn't able to swim up the stream. You see, the live fish are swimming against the current. The dead ones are just floating along, and they stink. Which am I? When I look at my day, what does it say? Which am I? In the book of Revelation, the Lord Jesus Christ speaks to Christians, not to non-Christians, not to the pagans and the heathens. He speaks to Christians. He speaks to the church of Sardis, and he says, I know your works, that you have a name, but that you are dead. What about me? You know what I mean? Do you know what I mean by dead? I gave you an example, like when I go to these social functions, and I just go and I sit there, I sip my tea, my coffee quietly, don't make a fool of myself, just, and leave. Had I went or had I not gone, nothing would have changed, except one thing, that afternoon that was mine is no longer. When you go to a meeting, when you meet a friend, when you go to a birthday party or I don't know what, social function, a baptism, this or that or whatever, or just going to work. One of the things we will address, not in this talk, but in future ones, I can count more people that I know that are unhappy in their work, but it pays the bills and so on. And you know what? I don't want to be ungrateful. Errol always starts off with, I don't want to be ungrateful. You know that the next thing is going to be, but I hate my job. Or, And sometimes we get stuck in the past. Several years ago, we were in Cuba, and we're on our transport going from the airport to the resort, and we drove through part of the city, and you see these cars from the 70s, these buildings, architecture. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, but it's from like 40, 50 years ago, and you're wondering to yourself, like, what happened? There's been no progress. When I spend a day, I wake up in the morning, I rush off to work that I don't really enjoy, I don't do very much, I come home, I'm kind of exhausted, I watch some TV, I have some dinner, I go to bed. The day before and the day after that, there's no difference, there's been no progress. That day in the middle, it might as well have not happened. I'm stuck in my past. There's something in my past that I won't let go of, that won't allow me to live in the future now. All of us ask the question, is there more to life than this? Is there more to life than a job that I don't particularly enjoy? Than commitments that I would rather not have? Than being stuck in a stage of life or a phase of life that I didn't anticipate being stuck in for so long? This series is all about that. That's what we're talking about. How to get unstuck and start living each moment like it's never going to happen again. Because guess what? It's not going to happen again. It all comes from finding the meaning that has been put there intentionally by an intentional God for this time, in that moment. Here's a tip. If I look at my life and I find no meaning in it, maybe I should start looking outside of what I have defined as my life. So, we have two daughters, Anna and Zoe. Anna's 3, Zoe's 1. Hi, Anna. Hi, Anna. They love playing hide and go seek. They play hide and go seek very differently. Anna plays hide and go seek by covering her eyes and counting to 5, and then coming and finding you, right? But she's the one who is supposed to be hiding. Zoe plays hide and go seek by not telling you that she's playing hide and go seek and going and tucking her away somewhere. And until you start saying, "Where's Zoe? Where's Zoe? Where's Zoe?" she won't come out. So it's like if I can't find my daughter, I just have to walk around saying, "Where's my daughter? Where's my daughter?" That has Child AIDS Society written all over it, eh? Right? The point is this. The point is that one person looks inside of themselves. The other one is looking outside of themselves. Both are good. Both are good. When it comes to prayer, it's all about meeting God who dwells in the kingdom of heaven in my heart. Looking within. But when it comes to not finding the meaning of my life in the circle which is my life, maybe it's time to start looking outside of that circle. Maybe I need a paradigm shift to realize that what's going on that's meaningful is just at the border of my comfort zone. The preacher in Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. Every day is like the next. Ever thought about monastic life? I actually never thought about this until I spent 40 days living in the monastery. One of the monks said to me, I asked him, so how do you know that you want to be a monk? He goes, well, most people just know that they could never be a monk. And I said, why? How come? He's like, well, it's obvious. Every day is identical to the one before. You live with the same 30, 40, 50, 80 people, sometimes 6 or 8 people in the monastery. Every day you have liturgy in the morning, and you know your work for the day, and vespers and your prayers in the evening, and every day is exactly like the next. So if you look at the external part of their life, every day is the same. There's nothing new under the sun. But that's because where they find meaning is not in the external things that you see. Where they find meaning is in what happens inside of them during their hidden life with God. I'm not suggesting that we should all force ourselves down that track and become monks and nuns, but the point is, it's very clear, it's very caricatural. Every day is the same. You ask somebody, how you doing? Right? What do people often say? Same day, different stuff, right? There's got to be more. There's got to be something outside my circle of usual. Mary and I have developed a recent addiction to a Netflix series called The Flash. So he's like this superhero who's the fastest man alive, and he can run super fast and do all kinds of anything. He can kind of do it super fast. And the first couple of seasons are kind of interesting, but then by season 3, like he can travel so fast he can travel into the past. And then he starts like changing the past. I don't want to ruin it for you if like you're a TV person or not, right? But and then and every season, something that's completely not in this frame of reality is introduced. You see, we've defined our frame of reality as being this big. I am a priest, so then this is what I do. I've identified myself by these very limited parameters and not allowed for more creativity in the story. There's this other beautiful story, one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament, is where the prophet Elisha, the king wants to kill Elisha. And he sends a whole army to kill this one man. So Elisha's servant looks out the window and he sees this whole army and he freaks out and he goes and he calls Elisha. He tells him there's a whole army here. And Elisha prays and he says, Lord, that you may open his eyes. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. God sent legions of angels of fire to protect him. He prayed, Lord, may you open the eyes of my servant. And of course, God rescues him in a very beautiful way. May God give you and me to have our eyes open, to be able to see that which we couldn't see before. Jesus stands in the temple on the Feast of Purification, where they have these huge water pots full of water on these pillars high up, right? And at the end of the feast, they pull on the water pots, and the water pots turn, and the water comes flowing out of the temple to wash out all of the blood and the sacrifice, whatever. It's a kind of annual thing, you know? And Jesus is standing there, probably knee or hip high, and water flowing out of the temple, right? And he says, if anyone thirsts, come to me, and I will give you to drink. Jesus is saying, don't look at this water that, like I'm standing hip high in. Come to me. Come to me, and I will give you something to drink. Feast of Tabernacles. Jesus says to the Samaritan woman, he says to her, in the same passage, forgive me, and also John 7, he says, he who believes in me, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. It's completely different. The dead John versus the living John. But there's only one life giver that I know. And his name is God, the Holy Trinity. Jesus says, I have come that you may have life and have it abundantly. Jesus delights in us having this really full life. When Jesus, when Peter and John healed the man who was lame a few days after Pentecost. At Pentecost, 3,000 believed at the preaching of Peter. They went up to the temple to pray. There was a man who was lame. They heal him. And he starts skipping and dancing and proclaiming the glory of God. 2,000 more people believe. Almost as many as the number, 2/3 of those who were converted at the preaching of Peter. They capture Peter and John and they want to put them in prison. Now, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, they perceived that they were uneducated and untrained men. They marveled and they realized that they had been with Jesus. Being with Jesus changes us in a remarkable way. Brings life where there wasn't before in a remarkable way. Saint Irenaeus of Lyon says, "The glory of God is man fully alive." God is most glorified when your life is the most meaningful. When your life is the most full of life. I know it sounds like it doesn't make sense, but the reality is that oftentimes my days are not full of life. Oftentimes my days are full of death. Mary was sharing with me that she had the privilege of meeting this man, Brother Andrew, speak. He was not a very remarkable person, not very well educated or very well trained. He actually spent most of his life early life, not really believing in God at all, until he got injured at war and his mom died while he was at war and she sent him a Bible, and while he was in hospital he read it and he met God through that way. And then it dawned on him that all the communist countries, he lived in Holland, and all the communist countries around him didn't have Bibles. So he said, well, I can drive over there with a few boxes of Bibles, and if I get caught, I get caught. So that's what he started doing, smuggling Bibles into communist countries. And he would pray as he crosses the borders, "Lord, you who made blind eyes to see, make seeing eyes blind." And they would unpack his trunk and lay it all out on the grass, and boxes full of Bibles. And the guards are holding the Bibles. Pack them all back up again, put them in his trunk and tell him, "Sir, go ahead," And he tells story after story after story after story. Most unremarkable, unqualified, boring person you could have ever thought of. And God used him mightily. And his life was meaningful. And he started a whole organization of people who go and encourage underground Christians in these communist countries, bringing them Bibles, but even more so bringing them encouragement. Look, Mother Teresa describes herself, and her family describes her, as the most ordinary person. Not particularly intelligent, not particularly eloquent. And look what God did with her. You're going to say, "I'm no Mother Teresa." Well, how about Hazel Million, right? The mayor of Mississauga, for the longest time, has cooperated with so many organizations similar to the Coptic Church and the Coptic Church, and has left a legacy behind her. Well, you want someone younger? How about Nermeen Riyadh? These are people who are alive, right? Who started Coptic orphans. You hear her story? Find it on YouTube, right? A cause touched her and she decided to do something about it, one step at a time. John Rockefeller decided to give away $580 million to charity and make his legacy that his organization would continue to give to charity more than it makes. Every choice we make today influences the future. Back to our four men. They sit outside. They say, let's go to the enemy army. They go to see them. When they go to see them, they find the camp empty. They find the camp totally empty. They find food, they find clothes, they find weapons, and they say, and they just start having a feast. And then one of them says something. He says, what we are doing today is not right. This is a day of good news, but we are keeping quiet. If you or I have experienced the difference between a day of death and a day of life, and you know what the transition between that is, why am I keeping it to myself? Why am I keeping it to myself? So they run back into the city and they tell the king. Well, they tell somebody and they say, okay, they bring them to the king. And then they go out and they venture and they find that overnight God sent one angel, just one, who killed 185,000 of the offending army, and the rest went screaming and running for their lives. And they became the bearers of good news. They became, these four lepers, these four nobodies, cursed to die. They became those who herald the good news. Those who bring news of victory that the enemy is no more. This isn't to talk about evangelism, but I can't help myself. Do you know what the word evangelion means? The word evangelion is a Greek word which comes from ancient Greece long before Christianity. So it's not actually a Christian word. And it means the announcement that the enemy has been defeated and the king is returning in peace and the people of the king will reign with him. That's what it means. That's what spreading the good news means. That's what these men were. Evangelists in the literal sense of the word, not in the Christianized sense of the word. These four nobodies cursed to die, the most meaningless refuse of the city of God. God made their lives count, and he can make your life and mine count as well. When we find life, we become a source of life. That is God's call for you and God's call for me. God wants us to seize this moment and to make the most of it for his glory. St. Paul says, I will spend and be spent for the glory of God. In 2 Timothy, he says, and now my life is, this is like the last letter he writes when he's in prison and he's expecting capital punishment. He knows Nero's going to chop his head off. He says, I have been spent, is being poured out. Imagine like when you're pouring something out and you're pouring it out to the last drop. What about you? What about me? Can our lives be poured out for God? Be poured out in meaning, in fullness, down to the last drop, that they may be full of life to everybody that we meet. Glory be to God forever and ever.